Hello and welcome to another edition of the Ducks Confidential Podcast. I am Ducks beat reporter James Crepia for the Oregonian and Oregon Live, bringing you this week's edition of our podcast. Appreciate everybody who already checks us out, and thanks to all of those who already subscribe and giving us the 5-star reviews and likes and all those fine things so other people can find the show. And appreciate those who check us out and for the first time as well. Hope to be able to provide you a little bit of insight, recap, and analysis from past games and set you up for the next games. And we'll certainly go over the win for the Ducks over BYU and also set up and take a look ahead to Wazoo this weekend and another big matchup and what that will have to offer. And we'll chat with Colton Clark of the Spokesman-Review. Does a fine job covering the Cougars. We'll chat with him, get some insight into Washington State and their 3-0 start and how things are looking there as well. So first, looking back at this really lopsided and commanding win for Oregon over BYU, 41-20, which of course we know it was not even that close, really. Don't take anything away at the end. Ultimately, if you want to close out a game that you were up 38-7 in even more commanding fashion, you go out and do it. And I don't think changing quarterbacks and putting Ty Thompson into that spot was a bad thing. I don't think it was too early at all. It's easy to second guess after the fact and say that, for a fan base who wanted to see Ty Thompson get in the season opener in a lopsided game, in a 40-something point game, to not want to see him in a 31-point game in the late third quarter, where if everything goes right, they're running the offensive drive into the fourth. Again, it becomes like revisionist history, and you're only complaining because the first play went for negative yardage on a basically dropped backwards pass. If not for that, who knows what that initial series ends up being. They pick up a first down or two, they're taking it into the fourth quarter. So be that as it may, Oregon was in command for a huge swath of the game. Never was remotely not in command for the game once they really took the second score, quite honestly. Even at 10-7, they scored immediately thereafter, to where BYU never really had a chance to get back into a competitive spot. It really just got away from them in a hurry, and that's because Oregon executed really well on offense, really efficiently on offense, and incorporated both up-tempo and grinded out and clock management, incorporated 13 bordering on 14 personnel with an extra offensive lineman and 3 tight ends to both milk the clock and really kind of churn out and gain short yardage on 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 situations at times. And also sprinkled in there some big plays, big passes. Yes, the 50-yarder is obviously what gets all the oohs and ahs out of the crowd. But beyond that, there were plenty of 20-plus yard passes that were very effective and where, there was legitimate air yards there. It wasn't just 20 yards where it was always a 3-yard screen pass that broke free. No, there was Bo Nix was getting to whip the ball around a good bit. He played effectively. He played efficiently. Again, one of the more statistically impressive performances for him, not just so far this season, obviously in 3 games, but really over the course of his career. 13 of 18 isn't going to necessarily blow you away, but 13 of 18 is quite accurate. And for 222 and 2 touchdowns, where he started off 10 of 11, and a couple of the incompletions were on throwaways. So really, I don't think there was really necessarily a ball in particularly high degree of jeopardy all game long. Again, efficient, effective, obviously also running for a career high in 3 rushing touchdowns to add to it on a 5-touchdown day against a BYU team who, forget about that they came in at number 12. I think most people recognize that was probably a little bit of a reach. And forget about the fact, frankly, that Oregon was 25 in the polls. No one's going to, in the grand scheme of things, remember what the poll was in week 2 or week 3 of the season. The point is Oregon was the more talented team. You knew that going in. BYU was coming off a tremendous win over Baylor. Their defense against the run had been quite effective. And they had pressured the quarterback really well. And they've been a perennial top 25 defense for the past couple of years. whether they were down a couple of receivers or down a couple of defensive linemen or not, was not going to change the outcome of last week's game. Would it have made them a little bit more potent? Maybe, certainly. But ultimately, Jaron Hall still had a good day. I don't know how much better a day he would have had one or two receivers been there, quite honestly. Oregon's defense played well. Oregon's offensive line, again, the strength of this team, probably the area of the greatest degree of certainty on the entire roster heading into the season, all offseason. You could have felt confident that the offensive line was going to be a strength. It remains the strength. You knew that Bo Nix was going to be playing behind the best offensive line he's played behind. He still is. They still have a lot of sack. Well, has he had to drop back 35, 40 times? No. But that aside, they're moving the football. They are running it well. They topped 200 yards rushing on a BYU defense that doesn't allow that kind of yardage very often. Defensively, they held BYU's offense on the ground to one of its lowest rushing totals in several years. Yeah, Jaron Hall picked up some, padded his stat line at the end of the game and stuff. Yeah. And I don't mind BYU going for it and calling timeouts at the end. Hey, they're still trying to play for the playoff and they don't have the benefit of a conference championship game. So they absolutely had to try and make a 21-point game look like a 14-point game. For anybody with a short-term memory when it came time in early December, potentially, if they're an 11-1 kind of team. So that doesn't bother me in the least. To the big picture for Oregon, offensively, like I say, I thought what was impressive was the effectiveness and efficiency and decision-making from Nix. Yes, that he could also run for some touchdowns. Some of it was short yardage, and he certainly benefited from some advantageous situations there, but that's neither here nor there. He executed it. His decision-making was still spot on, again against a good defense. A defense who plays basically exclusively zone, but nevertheless, in coverage, that is, and a three-man rush. But offensive line held up, paved the way for the ground game, gave Nix the time he needed, whether the ball got out quick or the ball went out on long balls. Either way, effective, accurate. Ground game was impressive. I thought Bucky Irving had a really nice day. Really nice day. And for that matter, so did Noah Whittington and Jordan James. And defensively, whether it was Brandon Dorlus or DJ Johnson or Bennett Williams, I thought those were the three players who really each had really, really big games. Dorlus obviously earns conference recognition, but I thought DJ Johnson was all over the field. Forget about whatever his stat line ends up being, and it was good. But there were plays that he was making or helped make where he wasn't the one recording the statistic. Bennett Williams, where he's making plays where, again, he wasn't recording the statistic, and he had a fine stat line for the game as well. So there were things that on the positive, on the upside for Oregon, beyond just the outcome, things within the game certainly stood out in a big way. Some areas and some question marks coming off this game that set up for and can be areas of a degree of concern going up against a Washington State team who it's an air raid base offense, but it's not the Mike Leach air raid where they're going to throw 45, 55 times in a game. They're going to be much more balanced offensively. We'll chat with Colton Clark about this and get his insight and perspective on the Cougars and their offense and Cameron Ward and all the things that they've got going on offense right now, and defense for that matter. But the areas to me that are of concern, of a degree of question, to me has to start with cornerback. Christian Gonzalez played very well. He's played well all season so far. Yeah, he got beat for the one touchdown against Georgia. Hey, guess what? That's part of playing the position. You're going to go up against some good receivers. You're not going to win every single rep. That's life. But he won far more than he's lost. So you knew going into the season that he was going to be Oregon's top corner. He has been. He's played well. Broke up a couple of passes on Saturday. Again, done very, very nicely. The question now is who is going to line up on the other side of him? And it was a question all off-season long, all fall camp long. And it is still a question. because each of the three corners who got on the field with Gonzalez on Saturday against BYU had their moments, and each of them also got beat. And I don't mean just got beaten that they gave up a pass. I mean got beat where, again, for those who really get into the weeds of this stuff, and I'm sure, frankly, even some casual fans can manage to pick up on this. It's not that nuanced. When the offense is on the left hash, and Jaren Hall, for as talented as he is, and he is talented, but frankly, he made some errors too. It may not have ended in an interception, but he made some errors last week. If Jaren Hall is going to complete passes from the left hash mark, 10 and 15 yards down the field to the right sideline, I mean, those are things that as a cornerback, you just cannot allow in college football. This is not the NFL with narrow hashes. This is a wide field. That is a long throw. Angles, leverage, these are things that, like I say, you just goes part and parcel to playing the position. Cannot allow those kind of throws. From a quarterback who is as talented as he is, was throwing to receivers who, like I say, he was without his top two targets. And that's not knocking the guys who BYU had. This is simply saying this is not CJ Stroud or Bryce Young or Joe Burrow or you name it, or Trevor Lawrence or any of those guys throwing to a litany of first-round receivers. This is a 6'1" quarterback who could be really good at the college level, whose game may or may not translate that well to the pro level, throwing a receiving core who, frankly, probably doesn't have an NFL player in it, at least not on the roster from Saturday. I don't know about with the guys with Romney and Nakua who were injured. Those are not completions that Oregon defensive backs who are former, 4 and 5 star guys should be allowing very frequently. And unfortunately for Triquez Bridges and Dante Manning and Jaleel Florence, while they each had positive moments in coverage, and they did, whether it was with PBUs or just not allowing the pass to be complete because, running guys out of bounds, whatever the case was, they each got beat on passes from one hash mark to the other sideline, and that's not good. And now you're going up against an air raid who, balanced or not, has some talent at receiver. Again, it doesn't have to be first or second round NFL talent. Has talent at receiver. And an effective offense, an explosive offense. And for that matter, hey, this is not just a matter of for this week with the air raid and Wazoo. This is also for Stanford. This is also for Arizona. This is also for, you name it, UCLA. Because guess what? Stanford's going to come in with, as you know, their bevy of receivers who are all 6'3" plus, and tight ends who are all 6'3" plus, and they've got a big quarterback with great pro potential. And I don't care what their record ends up being. I'm talking about just matchups. It's a game of matchups. And Oregon's cornerbacks, outside of Christian Gonzalez, remain a bit of a question. That's where it starts to me in terms of things that can be addressed, need to be addressed, areas where you can begin to get more answers as Oregon opens conference play against Washington State. That's a spot. In terms of guys who were hurt and are they going to be back and what does it look like? Yeah, sure, of course. You can always certainly look into that. Areas that will be compelling, particularly in this game. We talked about the offensive line being a strength, has been, will continue to be. This Wazoo defense, yes, defense of Washington State, is playing tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. Doing a great job against the run. Putting up numbers right now that Washington State hasn't seen in forever. By way of run defense. By way of tackles for loss and sacks from this defense. They have generated multiple takeaways in 13 of their last 16 games. Jake Dickert has delivered some outstanding results so far. Outstanding on that defense. Really unheralded. And they have a linebacker right now who, I realize, again, even if you've managed to watch some of Washington State so far, this was somebody who was absolutely not a household name at all Forget about the fact that obviously he wasn't in the conference last year. He was at Nevada. Yeah, Dion Henley played well at Nevada last year. He right now is playing absolutely out of his mind for Washington State. At Nevada last year, he had 103 tackles and 4 pass breakups and 4 interceptions. Had 3 tackles for loss. It wasn't really part of a blitz package or anything like that for Nevada last year. In 3 games, he's up to 30 tackles, has an interception, is second in the country with 7.5 tackles for loss, of which 4 of them are sacks. This is a player who Oregon can try and scheme around them. They can try and effectively basically take him out of the game, as the prior regime tried to do when they played Washington State with Jahad Woods. That was always something you had to do. You had to try and scheme around Jahad Woods. You had to try and scheme around Evan Weaver when you played Cal. It can be done. But this is a player who is everywhere for this Washington State defense. Everywhere. And he's not the only one, but he's the one who's just completely jumping off the page so far. It's really uncanny. If we were at almost any other school in the Power 5, he'd be, talked about in a far bigger light. But he's at a place where, he's flying a little bit under the radar so far. Well, Saturday is another national television opportunity, not just for the Ducks, but frankly, for this Washington State program who, look, their fan base is, I can only imagine, has got to be all kinds of jacked up and thrilled right now that they're off to a 3-0 start and they have an opportunity to upset Oregon and put themselves in a major, major national spotlight with a win. The opportunity ahead of both teams in this game is really rather significant. Dan Lanning and Oregon can pick up their first league win of the year, improve to 3-1, beat a legitimately good Wazoo team who is absolutely going to be bound for a bowl game at minimum. I mean, I don't think that's even remotely in question right now. I think it's a matter of, does Wazoo actually contend for something far bigger than that? And conversely, like I say, Washington State, the stakes for them, this is huge. If Wazoo were to win this game, other than all the love being thrown to USC right now, Wazoo would, forget about, they're on the fringe of the top 25. They would vault way into the top 25 with a win and improve to 4-0. And they would absolutely be on the fast track to being everyone's, Cinderella pick to all of a sudden contend for a conference championship and be, the second team to USC to play in Las Vegas. So it's a huge opportunity, obviously, for both sides. Stakes are high. Environment at Wazoo and on the Palouse is always a fun one. And forget about the size of the building. It always plays louder. It always plays in a bigger setting than that, especially when Oregon comes to town. So should be a fun one. Should be an interesting one. Again, plenty for the Ducks for Ducks fans in particular to look at, evaluate, assess in the course of this game beyond just the outcome itself, things within the game. Continue to look at the decision-making next. Continue to see the running back usage. See how the offense and the offensive playbook begins to expand a little bit over the course of each week. You're starting to see that more and more in how Kenny Dillingham is using not just the tight ends, but different formations and things he's toying with. See how the defense personnel matches against a air raid that, like I say, is more balanced, that includes a tight end, which is basically unheard of in the air raid. Lots of things to look at. Again, Oregon's going to be the more talented team. You know that going in. But it's not just a matter of talent. and this Wazoo team, just as BYU is well coached and really good, and they, look, Oregon outplayed them start to finish. But BYU made some really costly mistakes on both sides of the ball to where it got to 38-7, not just because Oregon was executing really well, but because BYU was not. Wazoo may not even have the high-end caliber talent of a BYU at certain positions. But they're at home. They're playing really well. They went into Camp Randall and knocked off Wisconsin. This is a big opportunity for them, major opportunity for them to get back back into the national spotlight in a really big way. Probably for the first time since the end of the Leach era, in a really big time positive way for Wazoo to, obviously the upset at Camp Randall. They've already had that spotlight on a major stage, no question. But an upset is one thing. Pulling off potentially 2 inside the month of September, that would, like I say, really catapult Washington State. So the stakes are high as Pac-12 play gets started for both teams. We'll chat about that and get some more insight on the Cougars from Colton Clark of the Spokesman-Review. And we welcome to this week's edition of the Ducks Confidential podcast, Washington State beat reporter for the Spokesman-Review, Colton Clark, who you can follow on Twitter, as always, at Spokesman Clark. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much for having me. This should be great. A cool game, interesting game coming up here. Thanks for letting me talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, yes, it should be quite the setting. To give folks who haven't seen Wazoo just yet this year, Colton, a little bit of basically a short brief of their season thus far. Obviously, I think most Pac-12 fans and Ducks fans know about the win at Wisconsin, but on the other sides of that were a less than impressive win over Idaho to open the season in a game that took nearly 4 hours. And then this past weekend against Colorado State, a really dominating performance. So this past 2 weeks, obviously some nicer games in the season opener. Also with that, in that Idaho game and Colorado State game, since they were at home, not huge crowds for Pullman just yet, but this weekend should obviously be considerably larger crowd and probably a packed house. What has this Cougars team looked like beyond the trip to Camp Randall? We'll obviously get into that a bit, but what has this team looked like for Ducks fans who haven't seen them as much thus far? Because there's a whole lot of new names compared to even just 1 year ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that Idaho game, very strange start. I guess Idaho might be better than everyone. I covered Idaho for years, and looks like they might be finally clicking on that FCS power level potential. I mean, they gave Indiana a fight too, but that's nothing to, 24-17. That was disappointing. I would say disappointing for the Wazoo fans watching it. Defensively, Wazoo hasn't shown many cracks this year, and that was kind of what did it. That Idaho game, Vandals couldn't move the ball really much at all. It was just Wazoo's offense is new. It's the air raid, a lot of new pieces, and definitely still kind of finding their rhythm in that game. They just couldn't really move the ball at all either. So it just came down to Wazoo's defense being really quite dominant in that game. And then you saw the Wisconsin game too. It was like the offense was the same thing. They couldn't get moving, but that makes a little bit more sense against a, kind of a nationally notable Wisconsin front. But then again, the defense did it again. I mean, Wisconsin had yards, but Wazoo's defense, like it was last year, I think they might be better than last year, but just like they were last year, it was, they give up yards, but they'll make timely plays. They make plays when they need to. You get stops in the red zone, 3 and outs near midfield, stuff like that. Like 50-yard drive to the 35 or something. They have like 2 sacks in a row, and it just destroys the drive. Things like that contained Wisconsin's ground game pretty well, and then Colorado State, then the offense finally showed those more sustained success, because you'd seen little tiny flashes here and there, but they were just going 3 and out so often. They couldn't sustain any possessions in those first 2 games, really. Just looked, disjointed, I guess you would say. That everyone was just a little bit, Cam Ward, with quarterback, was a little bit off target. Apparently, the receiver said we were running the wrong routes. We had busts. We don't know, like that Idaho game, they were in their own heads, and Wisconsin, tough defense, and still hadn't quite settled in. And that third game, you kind of saw the flash of it. They scored 28 points. They scored 21 points right off. So 4 straight possessions scoring. Those first 3 lasted like a combined 3 minutes. It was like 12 plays for, nearly 200 yards, just like that, clicking. It was like, oh, wow. They're like, this is the game we wanted to show what we're capable of against the super shaky Colorado State team, and they thought they did, and they were disappointed in the second half, not sustaining it, not stringing together more possessions and putting up more points. Only scored 10 in the second half, but what are you going to do when you're up 31 in the third? Yeah, I wouldn't imagine that. I've seen some people disappointed in that, which I think is kind of like, yeah, that's a little ridiculous. You're up 31-0 against a coaching staff. The players are obviously going to hit cruise control a little bit in that case. I think so. So yeah, just really then defensively, I mean they're second in the nation in TFLs and sacks. Uh, all over the place, six deep at the edge. Like they rotate six people consistently at edge. Five good defensive tackles, an NFL caliber linebacker, and then two starting middle linebackers that rotate. So just the front has been incredible so far, and that was kind of the expectation coming in, is that they were going to have one of the better Pac-12 defensive fronts, and they definitely looked the part so far, especially Dion Henley, outside linebacker, who's PFF's top graded linebacker in the country right now. He's just everywhere, sideline to sideline, covers ground so fast, and yeah, that defensive line is getting pushed consistently. So I hope that kind of sums it up.
Yeah, for sure. We'll get to Henley in a sec, but is it Henley in particular and a couple of the other additions on the defense that have led to? It's one thing to say improvement on run defense. And again, it's a 3-game sample, and we'll see. But a 3-game sample that includes a Wisconsin team that, I mean, anyone who's paid any attention to college football the last 25, 30 years knows that Wisconsin's going to run the football. And I mean, Wazoo is allowing 2.5 yards a carry and less than 100 yards on the ground per game so far. And yeah, 3-game sample or not, Wisconsin included or not, this is a Wazoo program that, I mean, they have not even sniffed anywhere close to that kind of statistic. So even if the number were to blow up to, frankly, 120, 140, 150, they'd still be having one of their best run defensive seasons over the course of the year, because, again, you don't have to go back that far to where that number was more than twice as high. So what has it been? Is it just the personnel changes combined with Jake Dickert being around a little bit longer, that the guys who were back have picked some things up, and the guys who are additions are upgrades in talent? Or what is it to where, like I say, the stats are, like I say, they jump off the page?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of that, just the Dickert system, and the new DC Brian Ward from Nevada. It's the exact same system, so they just kind of built on the same thing that's been installed here since early 2020, and the whole defensive line has played in this system ever since then. I think that the defensive tackle position really improved. That might be an understated part of the defense. Their guys who were gap pluggers last year actually can getting more push and making plays, and they added a couple of depth pieces. That's a huge part too, is the depth pieces they added. I mean, they had 2 standout edge rushers last year, 2 backups who were relatively reliable, but now they're like, we added 2 more. The 2 guys that were behind the stars, Ron Stone and Brennan Jackson, those guys that were behind the stars last year, they look even better, and then now they have their own backups. So just the depth and being able to play fresh consistently. They're more athletic at linebacker, even though they had 2 5-year starters that they lost to graduation. Those guys were, I mean, it's hard to, you can't really replace the experience, and those guys were known as, the kind of intelligent playmakers, but maybe not quite.
I was going to say, I don't think Ducks fans are missing Jahad Woods and Justice Rogers.
They were around forever, and they were super reliable. They knew what they were doing. They would make timely plays, kind of the identity of this defense. But the linebackers they have now between Henley and Mangoa, who rotates with Trey Brown, those guys are like, they kind of pop when you just watch them. You're like, okay, they have more burst. They're just more kind of relentless, harder hitters. They're screaming through gaps like crazy. I think Henley, just the run defense too. Henley, it's weird having an individual player like that make such a huge impact, but he was a skill player in his past, and now he just looks like an NFL linebacker, and he's just so fast and oh man, he just is around the ball on every play. And like they did last year, they're better at this now. But they kind of pride themselves on swarming, and they are. They always have at least 4 people just right around the ball. Brian Ward has a lot of great pressure stuff, similar to what Dickert was dialing up. Disguise things. He sends pressure from all kinds of angles. So it's like, yeah, I guess just schematic improvements and developments in the scheme as would be expected. They didn't lose anybody up front. Brennan Jackson maybe is better than Ron Stone Jr. now, which is crazy. Ron Stone was first team All Pac-12 last year, but Brennan Jackson, I think, might be their best defensive lineman now. So they have 2 guys who are all conference on the edges. Defensive tackle position got deeper. They're all seniors for the most part. They got more push there, got more athletic at the linebacker positions. So yeah, I think that might sum it up. They're just they play relentlessly. A lot of people have, this might be a too far of a callback, but 94, the Palouse Posse defense, a lot of people, even old coaches included, have been like, hey, the style that they play with is kind of like that, like attitude, just really aggressive, really fast, speed all over the field on the defensive front, and they're all swarming to the ball every time.
It's obviously, yeah, it's a huge shift, and one that for Wazoo for the better part of basically a decade to be known as the offensive, explosive air raid school, and they're back to the air raid. We'll get to that in a second. That now that they could be known for, not just good defense, not just even great defense, but they're, like I say, they're playing at a borderline elite level, and they're led by, and you mentioned Henley. Tell folks a little bit about Dion Henley, because this is a name that has really burst on the scene. And quite frankly, if a player like this, if you were putting this stat line up at any number of other schools, this is somebody who would be on a national stage at absolutely epic proportions. Now, He has an opportunity here this weekend coming up. Obviously, the Wisconsin game was big too, but it's another national televised game potentially for him if he was to have production against the Ducks and help a Wazoo upset at home or something like that. Would certainly be very big for him. But this is a guy who's already, you mentioned this is a former wide receiver at Nevada, converted to linebacker, and is now he was really productive at Nevada, and he went in the portal in December. So timing, lined up for him to do that. But how is it that, this 6th-year senior came to end up at Wazoo? And tell folks a little bit by way of his background beyond, like I say, the position change and obviously the school change. He basically has a season stat line in production after 3 games. I mean, he's forced 2 fumbles. He's got an interception. He's got 7.5 tackles for loss, which is second nationally. Like I say, if he were anywhere else, he would already be, there'd be national reporters falling all over this guy. Tell me a little bit about Dion Henley, and tell Ducks fans a little bit about a guy whose name is probably going to get called a whole lot on Saturday.
Yeah, so first of all, you can see the kind of athletic, the multifaceted background kind of come out. Sort of like I mentioned, he's just sort of has that skill player twitch, that burst out of his stance. You never know when he's blitzing. Okay, I'll start from his background first. Recruited by Jay Norvell to Nevada in 2017. He played quarterback, edge rusher, some wide receiver in high school at Crenshaw in LA. Was a receiver and return man for his first 2 years in college. 2019 was shifted to the secondary, played like a sort of nickel safety thing, sort of like a nickel, kind of a mix, like a rover defensive back, sort of. Mm-hmm. Got hurt kind of early in the season. Out for the year. Then Brian Ward, who's now Wazoo's DC, gets hired as DC at Nevada in 2020. See something in him. Oh, this guy's getting bigger. If we can just get him even bigger, this guy could be a really effective linebacker. Switches into linebacker in 2020. Plays there for 2 seasons. All Mountain West second team last season, his better year. Led the team in tackles. And I think people started to see that. He had a ton of turnovers. Was all over the field there. And people started to kind of see that versatility and the speed, and so he became one of the top rated defenders in the transfer portal, and a big part of it was Brian Ward was coming to Wazoo. It's the same exact system that they run. was really close with Ward, who recognized his like linebacking abilities. So he's like, yeah, picked Wazoo over Washington, USC, and Kansas State. And then, yeah, when he got here in spring camp, it was like immediately. I mean, he was plugged in at starting outside. They run a 4-2-5, so 2 linebackers. He plugged in an outside linebacker right away. And we all just, yeah, you couldn't help but notice. It's just like, this guy's kind of a complete package. Like, it was so clear that you're like, he covers sideline to sideline. He is going to be really tough for, I mean, he's almost too fast for tight ends and linemen to pick up. Too strong when he gets ahead of steam going for a running back. And he didn't have any sacks at Nevada, which is the crazy thing. They didn't put him in blitzing situations, but they realized that this offseason that I guess they wanted to increase their sack production was a big emphasis this year. And if we just do more of these creative blitzes and just get Henley on a little disguise going here and scream through a gap, then and it's worked so far. He's got 4 sacks. He's just it's almost hard to even wrap up quickly the thoughts on everything that so far that you've seen from him, because he's just the easiest way to put it is like whenever there is a play that's not downfield, like Dion Henley is going to be near the ball. Because he's just, 6th year, of course, you have the instincts too, and playing so many. I think I counted it up. He played even more positions, but I think he's played 10 since his like junior or senior year of high school. He's played 10 different positions, so you can see his knowledge of the game come out. And then also his character matches he is the best interview at Washington State in, I would say, 5 years, probably since Gabe Marks.
I was going to say Gabe Marks. It was always the fun personality at receiver there, who usually lit up a room and filled out notebooks for us reporters because he was a very fun interview.
Right.
Well, Henley's, like I say, he's a name that Ducks fans are going to become well acquainted with because, like I say, like as you're emphasizing, he's everywhere. I mean, the guy just, you can only scheme around somebody so much. He's just going to be everywhere. And like I say, with Rodgers and Woods and so many other guys on that defense who are gone, Armani Marsh and Ron Stone Jr. are about the only 2 guys whose names are really going to stand out in terms of repeats and guys from the past. There's just so many new ones. And that goes for the offense as well. We haven't touched on Cam Ward just yet. Obviously, a quarterback who drew a lot of attention in the transfer portal this offseason because of the success he had at Incarnate Ward and coming over and bringing back the air raid and all those things. Hasn't exactly lived up to the really gaudy numbers that he had there just yet. But again, it's just yet is the emphasis. And I think obviously Ducks fans hope that it continues for at least one more week. Tell us a little bit about Cameron Ward and how he has gone about adjusting to, playing at the FBS level. And by the way, it's not like he's playing poorly. It's just that he hasn't delivered on the, at times, ludicrous statistics he was putting up at the FCS level last season.
I think that, and also they're relying on the running game maybe a little bit more than they did at Incarnate Word. They're trying to really get Nakia Watson involved there, and which is funny. In the air raid, they're trying to do 60-40 passing to rushing, so that maybe taking some pressure. And like you said, a mid-level FCS conference to the Pac-12 is definitely a transition that's going to take several games to get your feet under you there. And you could see it sometimes where he's maybe a little overconfident in his arm talent and thinking that it's a FCS speed still. Maybe he gets trapped in that a little bit. He's made a couple of those kind of errant plays where like, whoa. Like this is even though this Colorado State, like this is still a different speed than the Southland Conference. But you can see the flashes of like what made him such a well-regarded portal guy. The arm talent, like his release is insanely quick. And it's like, people call it a Mahomes-esque skill set. Like you can see those flashes of he's rolling right, throws across the body, and it's like an accurate 20-yard ball, or he's, rolling left, throws this crazy pass off balance, and it just finds a target in the sideline, like things like that. The quick release, ability to maneuver in the pocket, improvise, and make off-balance throws just as well as he would in the pocket. You've seen that stuff. Really powerful arm too. they haven't really utilized the downfield passing game much yet, and I think that might be part of him settling in. Yeah, it hasn't been bad, especially in that first half against Colorado State. And I don't know how much you can really learn from that. I mean, the Rams, they're one of the poor guys. They're down there in the FBS, but you can see. I mean, it was clicking. I think he was 12 of 14 at the end of the or maybe early in the second quarter. I know he completed 12 of his first 14 for like 160 yards, and when they're running up tempo, and you can see he gets really comfortable in those situations. But when he can just distributes the ball to each corner of the field, little bit less downfield than I expected earlier this season, but they've been emphasizing that too to try and open it up a little bit more. Yeah, I think though you can definitely see the flashes of why he was such a big deal coming in, why he was a 4-star transfer recruit and all that, just with the arm talent skill, and you could really see like, oh, that if that's like, you know, the potential, kind of the explosive potential that they showed, moving really quick, you know, short hitch, crosser, boom, 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 just different routes each time, and different receivers each time, a lot of receivers to throw it to. I expect that he'll just because he really has, like, from week 1 to week 3, it's been a week, you know, as cliche as it sounds, week to week to week, it's been, oh, he improved here, okay, he improved here, he improved here, he showed more poise and like would look more comfortable controlling the offense in week 2, which I thought was impressive because he's in Wisconsin, his first Power 5 game ever, pretty much. And then, yeah, in Colorado State, he showed like that first half was just confidence clicking completely, and what we had seen throughout fall camp of him, just timing was right on the money. He was quick on all his passes. His reads were good. And then second half, they're like, oh, it seemed like they kind of unenthusiastic, maybe threw a couple of weird ones, off target balls, cross the body pass that got picked. So, you know, I think he's definitely more mature than sophomore would suggest. It seems like when you talk to him, he's kind of always the same, or seems like a real level-headed kid, a smart kid, the way he talks about football, and I haven't really seen much emotion come out in him, and I don't know how. There's mixed. Yeah,
everybody's got their own assessment of what that means. It doesn't mean, which is I leave that for the for professional psychoanalysts to get into that. I don't pretend to wander into that.
He seems poised, is what I mean. He seems to be handling it well. Maybe just still, like I said, getting used to Pac-12. It will probably take a little bit here, and Oregon will definitely be kind of the proving. So, because Oregon's got tons of speed on defense, right? That's kind
of that is certainly one of those areas. Chatting with Colton Clark of the Spokesman-Review. Last couple things for you, Colton, as you mentioned with the offense, obviously. Again, people hear air raid, and especially Pac-12 fans, and they go back to Leach, as they should. I mean, you know, again, him and Hal Mummy were basically the fathers of it. This is the Cougar raid, as they're calling it. This is a different iteration of it. This is not the Leach and Mummy air raid. This is not the Kingsbury air raid, or even the Lincoln Riley air raid, quite frankly. This is just plain different. It's a much more balanced approach. Where rushing wise, I would venture to guess that this is probably, by the time the season's over, going to be the iteration of the air raid that rushes for more yards than any other version to date thus far. What is it about? Is it just Dickert's desire to want to be more balanced on offense while still having that kind of explosive passing attack? Is it that this is kind of the lineage that the new offensive coordinator kind of comes in with? Is the combination with the running back talent? Because again, this is you mentioned, they're leaning on a new back in a major role in Nakia Watson. He was there last year, but Borgie and McIntosh are gone, and those were really productive players. And here you have Watson taking over, and like I say, he's averaging in terms of rushing yards more than Borgie was last year. So they are very much still relying on the running game and pretty much, close to where they have been the past couple of seasons. They just also happen to bring in, an explosive passer and a different kind of explosive passer. So what is it about this version of the air raid that's, again, beyond the balance of it, that's a little bit unique?
The number of formations is definitely, like, if you put side-by-side comparison with the pass heavy air raids, they switch things up constantly. Like, the base is like 2 slots and 2 outsides is the base. The shotgun running back there, like, very familiar looking base set for an air raid. But then all of a sudden, like, you don't know if, okay, you might get 5 wide or, running back split out. Maybe they'll do bunch with 2 tight ends out of nowhere, or they'll do all kinds of things, or like 3 receiver set, or like some kind of stack receiver set on the right with a tight end in. So they have Dicker wanted the offense to be multiple, to not be like, hampered by relying too much on one thing. And that is Eric Morris at Incarnate Word. He always stressed the balance too, because the two of them believe in the kind of like, you need a running game to make the defense prove it, right? To soften the defense. There was that, I'm trying to remember who it was. It was a Chargers coach, right? Last year, who had like a great explanation for it. It was like, you can be a pass heavy offense, but the defense needs to prove that it can tackle your guys. So that's like, you need a running game to fatigue them and to make them earn it. And that's kind of the same philosophy. I think that kind of sums up what Dickert and Morris believed in. And they trusted they wanted a guy that was, Watson's become more balanced than he was. He was kind of billed as a bruiser. I mean, he was the number 2 back, like behind Jonathan Taylor at Wisconsin for some time, had over 500 yards in 2 seasons. And just kind of unfortunate, Borgie and McIntosh were both good senior runners, and Watson was a 3rd stringer all of last year, never touched the field really until the bowl game when they were both on the opted out. And he's looked at, I'd like to see, the offensive line's got a lot unproven, and that showed up against Wisconsin. There just wasn't much room to run, but the last 2 games, I mean, they've been able to find some holes through the middle with him. They do a lot of RPO stuff too, by the way. Yeah, that's how they get their running game moving. Tons of RPO stuff. And you don't know when they're going to go. They do seem to rely more on quick game, intermediate stuff, get your playmakers into space, like the classic air raid philosophies. Tons of, bubble screens and whatever, tunnel screens and hitches to the sideline and crosses, like mesh routes and whatnot. And but yeah, then you'll just see them. They're like, oh, okay, there's 2 240-pound tight ends on the field. So like, there hasn't been tight ends on the field at Wazoo in 11 years, which I find incredible. So yeah, they wanted to be. Dickert says multiple so often when he's talking about the offense. He just wants the whatever defense they're playing to be able to, or to have to cover multiple parts of the field, multiple areas of the game. Like, you can see it, you can see the flashes so far, but like, yeah, again, they're not quite there yet, I think, in the development process. They're still kind of figuring out what play calls work in certain situations and how much they should run it, or, should we pass it. That doesn't seem to be a ton of consistency in the approach so far, so I imagine they're still figuring that out.
Last thing for you, Colton, is what are the things, you touched on it there with the offensive line being potentially an area. What are the things that, all right, you're 3 games in, this is the start of league play, people are a little bit more familiar with each other, but hey, this is a new Oregon coaching staff, and this is a Wazoo team that really, Oregon can barely go back to last year between both the personnel changes, the staff changes, and Oregon was the team that Dickert took over against basically last season. So even the team they were preparing for a year ago was not exactly the team they were preparing for because of all the tumult in the middle of the season. So for all intents and purposes, yeah, they're familiar, but are they? Not really. Not with the personnel and the coaching combinations and all that. So what are some of those things that are either unknowns of Wazoo or questions that you think are still facing them at 3-0 that win, lose, whatever ends up happening on Saturday, answers that need to be had, answers that will come one way or the other, in part on Saturday against the Ducks.
Yeah, definitely. Can the O-line sustain? I think that's a big. They weren't bad at all against Wisconsin. Actually, I was impressed because that was coming into it. I was like, oh, how is this O-line going to hold up? They don't really have much depth back. The 5 starters I think are like adequate. Like, all right, good with the 5 starters, but if somebody gets hurt, then you might be in trouble a little bit. So I'd like to see them, put together another, respectable showing against a team that because in the Idaho Colorado State games you can count them, sure, but I want to see a Power 5 performance, right? From the O-line again, like they did against Wisconsin, and let's see if that. I guess my opinion will be changed if it works out well, because I know Oregon's got a tough defensive front as well. That and the secondary was another one that's like completely confident in Wazoo's defensive front. They're I think improved from last year, but they lost all of their safeties and Jalen Watson, of course, who just had a game-turning pick 6 for the Chiefs last week. He was Wazoo's top corner last year, so I'm still a little hesitant to make any calls on the DBs. They started a freshman at one of the safety spots last week. It's questionable whether they'll have their starting strong safety back, who's another senior Nevada transfer. I don't know. I just haven't seen enough from the secondary yet to make a call. I don't know if they have that top coverage corner guy who takes on the toughest, Pac-12 receivers. I don't know if they have that really. They like Derek Langford and Shaw Smith-Wade, these 2 corners. They like them in those situations, but I don't know. We'll see how that works matched up against a more kind of potent offense like Oregon has. Those are kind of the main ones, though. I'm still wait and see. Is the O-line they lost their 2 starting tackles who were both 42 game starters, and they're both, one of them starting with the Seahawks right now, and the other one's in on the practice squad at the Seahawks. Pretty much in the return, pretty much 2.5 starters on the O-line, but it's a completely new group. They shifted people around. And then the secondary is completely new. Well, I guess the quarterback and the running backs are too, but the receiving core should play similarly. Same starting outside receivers. The 2 slots that they have are guys who are experienced in the program and place. They look like they're as good as, maybe not as good or as effective or stat producing as Calvin Jackson and Travell Harris were, but they seem to have the similar level of potential. The secondary completely different, not quite settled, I don't think, and same with the O-line. The rest of the team, though, I mean, seems I would say I kind of have a good feel on where they're at and kind of where the ceiling is. I don't know if Nakia Watson's not quite as explosive as like Borghi was. I think Cam Ward is probably got a higher ceiling than Jaden DeLora. To be honest, we'll just see how fast he can get his feet under him, like I said, and then defensive front same, secondary we'll see.
Well, again, appreciate all the time and insight, Colton. Again, he's Colton Clark, the Washington State beat reporter for the Spokesman-Review. Reminder, again, check him out on Twitter at Spokesman-Clark, and online and everything, head on over to the Spokesman-Review and check out all of Colton's fine work here leading up to Saturday's game and throughout the season, for that matter, because obviously we know it's still a division-based schedule in a divisionless league, but that's only the Pac-12. So for Ducks fans will be following along, Beavers fans will be following along, et cetera over the course of the year. And again, Colton does a great job covering the Cougs. So appreciate you as always, man.
Well, thank you so much, James. I really appreciate you having me on, and look forward to hopefully seeing you in Pullman this week.
Yes, very much looking forward to my 3rd trip to Pullman. Nice. So looking forward to it on Saturday. See you there.
Well, thanks a lot. Have a good one.